Eric Blake again. Bill, on the subject of rule of law, what constitutional amendments could you see yourself pushing for? This is the thing I mentioned earlier as well. Elaborate on a little bit here. I don't think we need any constitutional amendments. Well, technically speaking, we do. We need a constitutional amendment that repeals the 16th, 17th Amendment, at least those. And other than that, all we need to do is just actually, read the English sentences and put them in place. That's really all I see. People say term limits and stuff, and you can make a case for having a term limit amendment. And line item veto and all the rest of these things. But if I could make one amendment to the Constitution, it's a no-brainer. I'd repeal the 17th and 16th Amendments. And if I had to pick between one of those two, I have to tell you that would be a very, very difficult choice. I cannot imagine. I'm so tempted to abolish the 16th Amendment, but part of me says that the greater damage came from the 17th. I don't know, but without question, that would be it, no question. 16th and 17th Amendments are hereby void. The same way we did with prohibition. The whole prohibition thing, a constitutional amendment banning drinking, and then another constitutional amendment undoing the amendment that bans drinking, it bothers my sense of order, which if you saw my desk, you realize is not particularly strong in terms of my physical environment, but mentally, it bothers me that there's this kind of, departure. Oops. Then on the other hand, I think, well, maybe the best way to look at that is to look at it like a car. I had a new car, the Camaro I got in 2012. I love that car so much. And I actually had given, because that was the first new car I ever owned, and I actually gave some thought to this, and I thought, dents and things bug me. So what I should probably do with the Camaro is I should go out and buy a tiny little silver hammer, something really ornate, big enough, maybe like that big, the head that size, a silver hammer. And then I should go find some part of the car that I find I don't look at too often, and then I should take this silver hammer and put a pretty decent sized whack into the car. Now the car's got a dent in it, and now it's just a matter of other dents. It's just, okay, so now we've got more dents. So that's kind of how I feel about that. I'd love to see them undone. Uptick Mix says that the Equal Rights Amendment is rearing up again. That's not even close to having any chance of passing. Let's see. Tough fan Steve Young says Aliens and Sedition Act. How about that? If you enforce the now, needless to say, the Aliens and Sedition Act had a lot of problems with it, and was in many ways just a vile piece of legislation. But I can say, in the present time, if you were to enforce the law against illegal aliens and sedition, a lot of people who should be in jail or out of the country would be in jail or out of the country. I'd love that. By the way, I think we ought to. I think banishment is highly underrated. I think we should. Look, I'm not saying we should arrest Antifa because they disagree with us politically. I think they're welcome to disagree with us politically as much as they want to. In fact, if people were arresting Antifa simply for disagreeing with us politically, I'd be thinking about getting out the gun in order to protect these miserable bastards, because that's how it's supposed to work. But since there are criminal assaults going on, I think anybody like that, who's like anybody who smashes windows or something, I think you ought to say, here's what you're looking at, 3 years in federal prison or banishment. You give up your U.S. citizenship. Find some country that'll take you. I think it'd be awesome. Everybody else remember when you were, most people are more or less our same age group. We were talking about Carol Burnett and Tim Conway earlier. But I remember when I was in high school, when I first came to American schools from Bermuda, one of the things that we all had to read was The Man Without a Country. Anybody remember that? Some guy was a traitor, and the punishment, it was fiction, obviously. The punishment was that he would be constantly at sea. He would never be allowed back into the United States or anywhere else for that matter. The guy would be basically stationed on a ship, and then when an incoming or outgoing ship would pass, they'd just swap him off, and he never got to see the country again. And I thought that would be really. I just remember the story. DCG 44S says I could go for tossing some trash out. I do too, but you got to be careful about that. And I'm not accusing you of this. We got to be very careful about saying I need to throw these people out of the country. The only people I'd like to throw out of the country are the people that say they hate the country. That's it. I don't even care if you say these things have to be fixed or whatever, but people who just say this is just the worst place in the world, and I just want to say, well, here's your invitation. I think we ought to pay for it. I think, frankly, whether it's constitutional or not, I think paying people to leave America permanently who hate it here would be in the best interests of the United States security and the United States general welfare and general level of happiness. Yeah, you tell us where you want to go, and we'll fly you there, and we'll take your passport when you land, and that's it. Yeah, they don't want to leave because this is why you can have the reason you can have Bernie Sanders socialism is because you've got kids living in a capitalist society talking about socialism. If they lived in a socialist society, they'd be talking about capitalism and how much they wanted that, and they'd be living a lot worse. I just think that they ought to. I really think they ought to. Experience it, Hey, you think it's so awesome? Go live in Sweden for a year. And Sweden is the luck of the draw. It's when the Venezuela thing was going down there a couple weeks ago. The smartest guy on the internet, Iowa Hawk said, you saw the riots and cars, the police cars running over people, and Iowa Hawk put out a tweet showing this police car plowing into citizens in Venezuela, and he wrote, but the brochure said Sweden. And even there they would be surprised at how much they wouldn't like it, I think. There's a Swedish word for strange people. The Swedes, I don't know an awful lot of them. The ones I've met I was not particularly enamored with. They just seemed very, very, almost like robotically passive. I do remember reading that that Sweden, that there's a word in Swedish that means just sufficient. In other words, you go over to somebody's house and you feed them dinner, and the best compliment that they can pay you was that it was just sufficient. In other words, enough food for me not to be hungry, but not so much food that any was wasted. It was just sufficient. Somebody might know what that word is. So, is that the word lagorm, Exner? Lagom? I watched Exnor perform Heroic Act just a couple nights ago. Lagom, yeah, thanks. Everybody's coming up with lagom. Yeah, it was just sufficient. I wonder how these socialists would deal with just sufficient. Yeah, we're going to go out and we're going to party. It's going to be off the hook. It's not going to be off the hook. You're not allowed to be off the hook. It's going to be just sufficient. You will have just enough partying for you to feel satisfied, and then you'll go home. We're going to take this thing over the top, man. We're going to take it to a whole nother level. No, sorry, you're going to keep it right here at this level. And this is Sweden, right? This is the top of the pyramid of the socialist potential futures. I just think they would. I don't think they'd dig it too much. I really don't. That outfit is sick. It is sick. but it's not lagom. It's way too flamboyant, and you can't wear it. Not legally. We're just going to shun you if you wear outrageous stuff because you're showing off. You want more attention than other people, and I just love to give it to them. I just think they just here, go. You want it? Here it is. You can go spend a year, enjoy it, knock yourself out. Yeah, DCS 44 says just sufficient sounds kind of insulting. It does sound. I'm sorry. Oh, it's pronounced, and then he gives me a phonetic thing. To our ears, it is insulting. It's like it's just, petty and small-spirited and lacking generosity. But you can understand that the Swedes, who are so obsessed with equality, think that giving somebody too much of something is as bad as not giving them enough. If you put out too much food, too much delicious food, that's as bad as not enough delicious food. And as Aesop points out, Sweden's not really very socialist anymore either. They can't afford to be. No one can afford to be. Okay, two to go. Martin Archer, are you one of those of the opinion that those who committed crimes in the attempted bloodless coup of President Trump ought to be punished to the full extent of the law? Or do you think this would set a bad precedent for how we do politics and regime change in the USA, and that more restraint should be shown, or perhaps something in between? He asked miscreantly. I am 100%. Just reading your sentence. Are you of the opinion that those who committed crimes in the attempted bloodless coup of President Trump ought to be punished to the full extent of the law? I am emphatically one of those. Or do you think that this would set a bad precedent for how we do politics and regime change in the United States? I'd prefer change of administration, although regime is starting to sound a little more like it. I don't think it would be a harmful thing. I think that if you punish them to the full extent of the law, it would actually set a good precedent for how we do politics in this country, which is you lost the election, and that means you don't get to be president. And furthermore, it means that the guy who did win the election does get to be president. And if that's not agreeable to you, you're welcome to your own bitter opinion. But if it turns out that you're going to break the law in order to make sure that that happens, then you need to go to jail for the rest of your life. Yeah, absolutely. Last one, and then it's time for me to come home. Coming home, Elizabeth. Here's a big one. Yeah, it's a big one, baby. Alx, cool. ALX, what? Sorry, Walson. Militia, citizens grand jury, doubtful. We need professionals despite 12 years of time wasting. I think this kind of goes to the whole thing we talked about a little bit ago, and that is that the way to get the rule of law enforced is by electing representatives who are going to enforce the law. And I do think that, as I said earlier, the salient point of this entire goat rodeo is not that these deep state operatives have allowed the American people to do this or do that. Is that we've allowed them to exist. The American people have created this thing. Let me rephrase that. They didn't create it. They allowed it. They allowed it by not stopping it. And you should have done that in the beginning. I'm trying to think if I can remember the first case where I remember clearly thinking that the rule of law was just being violated, just like shockingly so. Nothing comes to mind, but that doesn't mean it won't later. Okay. I think that'll do it for this happy edition of the Stratosphere Lunch Show. Almost exactly 2 hours, somewhere in that vicinity. Made possible by the paying members of BillWhittle.com, who keep these electric lights on that you see right here, and who make everything else happen, and who to whom all of us are very, very grateful. Not only Scott and Shelley and Mark and Wyatt and the rest of the team here, but also all the people who watch the videos and all the rest of them. All very grateful. So thank you. And I think that'll do it. And so I suppose we will see you next Thursday night, right here on your very own Stratosphere Lounge. And we'll see you next week. Push the button, Frank.